Welcome back to the Isn't That Rich podcast. Today, Ashley and I are joined by Mary Kay Harris, who is an independent owner of an H&R Block franchise located in Anna, Illinois. And she brings a lot of expertise when we have been talking about tax fraud. It's something that we've been talking a lot about lately is fraud in general. And we are excited to have her on today to kind of bring her experience in the tax world and to share what she's seeing. So welcome on, Mary Kay.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the tax world.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I know when we talked earlier, you've been doing it for a long time.
So I'm entering my 27th season. I started back in 1997. My dad had a couple of H&R Block franchise offices, and I just started at the bare minimum of doing the back office work and entering receipts. And then I took the tax course, and I loved it. It just it's something I never expected to do. I was just doing it as part-time work, and I fell in love with tax, which a lot of people look at me like, why? And I think it's because there's rules. I'm a very structured, rule follower person, and I love to know the rules, but also know all of our rights and what we can and cannot do in the tax world. So I purchased a franchise in 2018, and we've been going ever since. So it got really exciting because we hit COVID right in my first couple of years.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, it was very, very exciting tax season time.
Yeah, so this is your 6th season as being an owner. Is that what you said? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I'm running the whole office. So I write returns as well as manage and run the whole office. So
I have so many questions for you, but since we're talking about tax fraud today,
Yes.
What exactly is tax fraud? And can you explain that?
So tax identity fraud. So there's tax fraud and there's tax identity fraud. And I think that's our focus is the tax identity fraud. That is where someone will basically steal your identity, file a tax return in order to receive a fraudulent refund. And that has, as we entered the digital age, kind of in 2013, that's when do-it-yourself filing online really became popular. As we entered that age, of course, the fraudsters figured out ways to do that. And so it kind of peaked until about 2019. And then the IRS kind of got a hold on it, was able to get a step ahead of the fraudsters. But then unfortunately, COVID did a lot of things to our world, and it also severely increased the tax identity fraud that was happening in a lot of ways. There were a lot of fraudulent unemployment claims. There were a lot of fraudulent tax returns just to receive those stimulus payments.
Yeah.
I have a statistic, and I'll have to look at my notes because I could not remember it. So in 2013, like I said, it had increased, but then by 2019, the IRS had got it down to about 137,000 cases. And then in 2021, the IRS's Identity Theft Victim Assistance Unit had nearly 500,000 cases pending. So you can kind of see what happened. So it's one of those things you may not even know that it happened. And so I try and educate every client, every person that will listen to me about how to protect themselves from the tax identity fraud happening to them.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. How does somebody know, or what are the red flags of you being a victim of tax identity theft?
Yeah.
I gotta say it right.
Yeah. So most commonly in season, when someone would come into the office and we would file the return, that return will reject out of the e-file system. And it will say the reject code will be, there's already a return on file with this taxpayer's social security number.
Wow.
Which is very concerning.
And scary.
Very concerning. We have unfortunately seen a huge increase in that. What happens on the back end? We just have to mail that return in for that client. So number one, it's going to slow down their refund if they have one. It's a very slow process. But we also have to file we have to file an identity theft affidavit with the IRS to alert them that there was a fraudulent return on this person's Social Security number. Another way that they can find out is the IRS will send letters. So there are a couple different letters that they will send to say, verify your identity. Mm-hmm. And if you've not filed a tax return, that's a pretty good indicator that there's a fraudulent return out there on your Social Security number.
So explain that to me. I guess I'm confused by this. So they'll send you something in the mail, and if you don't respond, then they...
Yes. So you have to respond to it. So say you received a letter in the mail. Let me find that. So the letter number is 5071C. That will request to verify your identity. And then there's let's just talk about the 5071C.
Yeah.
So that letter you would receive in the mail, and it would say, we've received a return on your Social Security number, please, and it will give instructions. Either they'll let you verify your identity online, or they'll ask you to call a telephone number, or they'll ask you to make an appointment at the IRS office nearest you, which our nearest one is in Belleville, I believe.
Wow. So everybody from around here is going up to Belleville.
Yeah.
Belleville.
Gotta drive 2 hours.
Dang.
Yeah. I may be wrong. It's either St. Clair or Belleville. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But
regardless, it's a ways away.
Yeah. So you have some drive time. So we see a lot of clients come in with those letters. Unfortunately, we cannot verify your identity for you.
Right.
Like that is a step that you have to do on your own. Now, we have sat with clients while we try and get the IRS on the phone. If it is one that we can resolve through the online system, then that's pretty easy to do. We just help them through that process. Because a lot of times that it's a very scary situation, so clients just really need someone to hold their hand through that, and that's what I'm here for.
Gosh, I wouldn't know what to do if I got a letter in the mail. And then, we've talked a lot about mail fraud recently. And so even getting that piece of paper, the 50 whatever you said, I'd be like, well, this is fraud too. And then
throw it away.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're trained to do now. You don't trust anything. And so I know I got a statement the other day. It was like a notification that some of my personal information had got compromised. And I was like, I think that's someone fishing for information. Call this number, right? But it was actually a real thing that I should have paid attention to. But that happens all the time. So I would just disregard some of those important things.
So I always advise if it is a letter from the IRS or if it's a letter from your Department of Revenue, so for Illinois Department of Revenue, always contact a tax professional who can look at that letter and tell you, is this a scam or is this a real letter from the IRS? Because that's what we're trained in that. We're trained to know what the letters look like, where the barcodes are, what the addresses are. So those are things that your tax professional can help you with.
And so... Okay, so let's say then I can call the IRS, right?
Okay, sure
I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's say I get this letter, I call the IRS. They're wanting me to verify my identity I'm trying to make sense of this. Like I didn't do my taxes yet. And so they're basically like, something's fishy's going on.
Right.
Okay. And so you can just be like, no, that's not me that did that, and they'll shut it down.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
but if it was you, then you would just go through with the verification steps.
Right. So either way, you want to respond to it.
Okay.
So you need to, if it's not you, you need to respond and tell them so they can shut that return down. If it is you and you had filed and and that's common too. So if you file a return, they will randomly pick and just send an identity verification letter. Most commonly, we see those on first-time filers because they have not been in the system, or on somebody who may not have had a filing requirement for quite some time. So a life event has changed for them, and now they're required to file a return. And so now they're going back into the system. The IRS generally sends an identity verification letter to them to just make sure it's not a fraudulent return going in on their Social Security number. But either way, it needs to be responded to because we either want to shut it down or we want we want your refund, your tax return processed if you have a refund.
Yeah. Are there any other red flags to look for that might be indicators that, somebody has filed fraudulently on your behalf?
Those are the main three. I always encourage that you keep check on your credit report because that is also a good indicator. If you see something weird on your credit report that you did not do, of course, you want to freeze that. And the next step would be following up with the IRS to make sure there's nothing out there. So what I advise every taxpayer to do is go ahead and make their account on the IRS website. That is your main source of communication with the IRS. And I say we're all comfortable with having a banking
username and password.
Yeah. Same thing. And if you want to see what letters have been sent to you, if any, if you just need to check the status of your return or anything in the past, it's right there for you. But a lot of people don't realize that account exists.
I wouldn't. I guess I don't have one. So that's a good thing. Good thing for me to know is that I need to go and make an account on, and it's just irs.gov. Is that
irs.gov. It's the only place I will ever recommend that you're going to put in your social security number.
Yeah.
But what you will do first, there's a login called id.me. So you will create an id.me account. Through that account, the IRS is the government is going to verify your identity. We help clients do this a lot because it is kind of an overwhelming process. It's a lot of technology.
Yeah.
So I always advise if you're going to do it, have your laptop or desktop computer as well as your cell phone. Don't try and do it all on your cell phone because there's a lot of second factor authentication going on. They're going to email you a code. They're going to text you a code. And moving back and forth on your cell phone, it's difficult for me. So I always recommend having both available. If you don't have it available, contact your tax professional. Hopefully they'll be willing to help you with that. We do that in our office a lot, where we just sit with the client and get that set up. Generally takes about 10 minutes. It's not a time-consuming process, but I always say don't go into it rushed.
Right.
Give yourself time because there's going to be things that you have to, go back and forth with email and text messages. You also need your driver's license or your picture ID available because that is one way they're going to verify your identity. You take a picture of the driver's license front and back. And then the very fun part is you have to hold your phone up to your face and it scans your face. And whenever it scans your face, it's like that inverted black and white. And so a lot of people get a little wigged out about that.
Like, what am I doing?
They're like, oh, now all my sun damage is on this video.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I know I'm a Gen Xer, so if you remember that Take On Me video, that's kind of it's like you're turning into a cartoon, but you're not. You're fine. But they're getting all of your facial points to match it to your driver's license. And then you just answer a couple of questions, things that they pull from your credit report is another way that they verify your identity. So basically, what car do you own that has this certain loan on it?
What street have you lived on before? Things like that.
I'm always like, how do they know these?
I'm like, I don't remember.
Everything about me.
Yeah. And if all goes smoothly, it takes about 10-15 minutes. You have your ID.me account. You can log right into the IRS and see your transcripts. You can see any letters that have been sent. This came in very helpful back in 2021, I believe it was, whenever they were sending out the advanced child tax payments.
Yes.
And no one could remember what they got when it came to tax season. So we help clients make those logins so we can log in and see because all the proof was right there. But I just advise everyone have one. That way you can periodically log in every 3 months.
Yeah.
And just make sure there's nothing weird on your IRS account.
We always say, especially with the bank, that to review your credit report all the time. But this is another place people need to be looking just to double check that their identity has not been, or that they've not been stolen.
Yeah. Because if fraudsters have filed a tax return, they have your name, they have your social, and they have your birth date, because those three things have to go into the electronic filing system for the return even to be accepted.
Yeah.
So where are they going to go next? They're going to go open accounts. credit card accounts, things like that. So it's like one step could be the tax return. The next step could be fraudulent credit card or loans, or vice versa, you know. So
yeah, it's not just someone taking your identity just to, whatever. It's like they've got some motives and they're going down the line.
Yes.
And it could really, like, that's the thing, you want to get on top of this stuff quickly.
Yeah.
Because we know this at the bank, like the quicker you can get on something.
Yes. The quicker you can stop it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned during COVID, there was a big increase in all of this fraud that happened because of how they were sending that incentivized money or whatever, the tax credits for the child.
right, the stimulus payments.
Yes, the stimulus payments. It doesn't seem like they're targeting one demographic of person. You also mentioned earlier that a lot of first-time filers have had tax fraud. Can you talk about that a little bit? Who is being targeted? Is it a certain demographic? Because for me, it seems like it's everyone.
It's all over the place.
Yeah.
No one is safe, unfortunately. We've seen anywhere from first-time filers all the way through to our elderly clientele. Now, I will say, I don't see a lot of tax identity theft, in my experience, in the working middle age bracket.
Okay.
The majority of what I've experienced has been the first time filers or people who may not have been required to file before or are elderly.
Gotcha.
That's where we're seeing it the most, or I am. That's my experience. So I can give you a couple examples.
Yeah.
So I had a longtime client of mine. She is probably 80 years old. She's a mature client, and she's been with me a really long time. She called in a panic last February. She's a March filer.
Yep.
And she called in February, which I thought was odd. And she said, I think I just made a really big mistake. And I said, oh, honey, what happened? And she said, I got a phone call. They said they were Medicare. They were promising me all these fabulous benefits that I didn't know were available to me. And it was things that she needed. So they had enough information of her needs. And so she got really excited because she's like, I could really use that back brace.
Yeah.
And
we just heard about that scam on one of these. Yep.
Yeah. And so she gave them her information off of her Medicare card. And that's when it dawned on her. If they're calling me from Medicare, why do they need my information off my Medicare card?
Yeah.
But she'd already given it. And so she hung up. She tried to call the number back and got nothing. And so she was very smart, and she called the Social Security Administration and told them what happened. And they said, okay, that's probably a fraudulent call. You need to contact your tax person immediately, because that's probably what they're going to do with your information. So she immediately came in. We filed the tax return. Fortunately, she had all of her documents. We filed the tax return. It went through fine. It was safe. But here's the next step that we have to do. And I would suggest this, going back to setting up your ID.me. This is a proactive step anyone can take to protect themselves from tax identity fraud. So we went ahead and filled out the identity theft affidavit. And doing that, the IRS is going to issue her what's called an IP PIN, an individual protection PIN number that goes on the tax return from here on out.
Okay.
Every year they issue a new PIN number, and that PIN number has to be on your tax return in order to be electronically filed. If it is not on there, it automatically rejects.
Well, that's really good. That's a
very safe, safety net that everyone can have. You don't have to be a victim of identity theft. I believe when they first started doing this, they only gave it to identity theft victims, but now it's rolled out to where you can go in and request it. So once you have that ID.me account, you can log into your IRS account. You can request a PIN number, and that way you just have it. And every year you log into your account before you get your taxes filed, find your PIN number, and give that to your tax professional. So that is the best barrier that you can have at this point in time to protect your tax return.
So good.
What are the most common ways you're seeing criminals conduct tax identity fraud? Did I say that right?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So what we see most is that they will use a do-it-yourself software. So they're not coming into my office
right.
and trying this, right? They are downloading a software, and there's all kinds of them in the industry.
And are those softwares legitimate? Mm-hmm. I could legitimately go as myself and do it?
Yeah. Okay. So it's there for the consumer to use. Mm-hmm. And like I said, there's bunches of them. H&R Block has their own do-it-yourself software, and they are somehow finding the personal information of these people. That part, I don't know. I've never figured out how they do that. But they are using the do-it-yourself software and sending these in.
So DIY tax fraud.
DIY tax fraud.
Okay.
Is the majority.
And when we were talking about like the first time filers, or when your life is very simple, it's just you don't own any business. Filing might be you don't have a lot of ownership in things yet. That's when you would want to do it yourself. So I can understand why those people would become victims pretty easily.
Yeah, I've never wanted to do it myself.
I always say there's two types of people. There's people, like if I was not in the position I'm in, I would probably do my own taxes, right? And then there's my husband, who would never touch a tax return in his whole life. He's always had someone do his taxes.
It's a little scary.
Yeah. He's like, I don't even want to go there.
I'm going to jail for...
Yeah. I think it's just how our brains are wired. But yeah, that's where we see the most of it, is just because they don't have to face anyone, right? They can just type in the information and send it in. And if it goes through, great. They got their money.
That rebate's on its way.
Right. Yeah.
Or the refund,
generally, a way to also see if it's fraudulent is a lot of times the refunds will be even numbers. So $1,000, because most of the time, like your refund is 1,014 or something, it's never like a round number. So when I pull someone's transcript from the IRS, which that's another thing we can do, we can get authorization to go and pull transcripts for you. So we can see your tax history. And if I see a year and it's like $1,000, I'm like, that's strange. That's going to perk my ears up and to dive a little bit more in and ask more questions about that particular tax year to that client of what did you do? Where did you go? Did you file? Things like that.
So if the criminal gets the money, they get the return money. Let's say it happened to me. The criminal did that to me. Do I still get my money?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I didn't know if the government was like, sorry, we gave it to someone else.
Yeah. No. It's not, how do I want to say it? It's kind of a painful process for the truthful person to get their money, because one, we're going to have to mail that return in. So that just slows it down all the way, because a lot of people don't realize when you mail a return in, someone at the IRS has to take that return and then enter it into a computer.
So all that stuff you're filling it out, they're physically going in and manually.
So that's what takes so much time to do that. And so it's just a very slower process than what we're normally used to with electronic filing. And you will probably receive the letter that you have to respond to. And until that letter is responded to, no one's going to type anything in for you, so it just slows down the whole process. They normally say between like 120, 180 days, but
wow,
a lot of times it's
longer
than that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you have a dollar amount of how much money is fraudulently given away
every year?
Yeah,
you said the case number. There was like 500,000 or something.
Right.
Every year.
How much? Because that's a crazy amount of money. That's just not. It's
Well,
not doing the right thing.
when we had the episode about mail check fraud, that was like in the millions in 6 months. It was like 355 million within 6 months of last year. So I'm sure this is just another way that they're stealing our tax money.
It's a sickening number.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, anyway, I want to talk about, so if people do get caught or somebody, what are the penalties that they face? I mean, it's pretty, do you know anything like that?
It's criminal. The penalty is up to $100,000, $500,000 in fines if you're faking a business.
Wow.
3 years in prison. And then tax identity theft for tax fraud is additional fines and additional prison times, often up to 2 years on top of the fraud-related penalties. So, you're looking at 5 to 7 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines if they can catch the person.
Wow.
All they get maybe $1,000.
Yeah, maybe $1,000.
Get a job,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, they work way too hard.
We
at
say
being
that
criminals.
about all of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some steps that people, I know you kind of have given us the ID.me and getting your IRS account. What are some other practical tips you can give for people to protect themselves from this?
So on top of the ID.me, checking your IRS account regularly, go ahead and get your IP PIN. So you have that every tax season. I, of course, advocate to see a professional, even if you are just one W-2, just starting out in your life, a young person. There is a lot of value in having a professional who knows the laws, but not only for that year, but your life is going to change down the road. You potentially get married, you're potentially going to have children, maybe start a business. A lot of side gigs are happening right now with DoorDash and things like that. So there's a lot of advice that can be given to maybe plan out your year. I always advocate for young people to start a Roth IRA because what better time than when you're 18 and have, $50 a month to put back. So to get that tax-free retirement, that's always, so things like that. I always advocate for a tax professional. Maybe you don't want to spend the money, but this is the way I always say it. It's one fee for one time a year service. We're not having to pay that every month. And basically, if you chop that fee, divide it by 12, you're paying maybe $10 a month to have a professional take care of you. The professional also signs the return. So my name is on every return. I'm taking responsibility for that return. And if you do get a letter that says, hey, we need to verify your identity, you are welcome to come back to me. And then we work through that together. And isn't it nice to have someone to work through that with than just sitting at your computer and saying, oh my gosh, I filed this. Now what?
Yeah. Another thing about working with somebody is there are new laws that come out every year in regard to tax law. And so to have somebody inform you of those, we realized last year there were like 10 different laws. Matt, we had an episode all about the new tax laws, and every year there's something new that comes out. So if you're not working with somebody who knows that, how would you even go about finding those out? So
right. Yeah.
So Mary Kay, what are some new ways that fraudsters are hitting people with tax fraud?
So the more prevalent AI comes into our world, it's used for a lot of good. It's going to be used for a lot of bad. So voice generated AI, where you can receive a phone call from someone that sounds like your loved one, and they're asking for money or asking for information. Always be wary of that. If it's a 3 a.m. phone call and you're getting it from your grandson, hang up, call the grandson, make sure that they're actually calling you. Because personally, I know 2 people who have been victim of that. And it is scary, and that seems to be hitting the elderly population.
Yeah.
As well as with the gig economy. So a lot of people are doing those jobs on the side to, increase their household income. Well, the fraudsters are also going to pretend that they're working for those companies. And so, a lot of false 1099 going out to file these tax returns.
I didn't even think of that.
And of course, the good old phishing emails where you receive the email asking you to click a link because your package hasn't been delivered. And then they want a credit card number. Be wary of those. And now with text messages as well. So there's always the text message that is saying FedEx can't deliver your package. Click on this link. And those are all ways that scammers are trying to get this information so they can make a fraudulent dollar.
Absolutely.
Is the IRS ever going to text somebody?
No.
Thank you.
No, never. Never. The only way the IRS will communicate with you is through a letter. So that's
Good
why.
to know.
Yes.
I think people get scared, like
Yes.
if
Or a
someone
phone call.
texts, like this is the IRS. You know,
Yeah.
they do that too with the taxes. Like, you didn't pay your taxes. We're coming to arrest you in 5 minutes.
Yes.
Be ready.
Yeah. So there's those messages as well. The only way the IRS will ever communicate is through a letter. And that's why we always say, if you do receive a letter, let us look at it first. Just to make sure it's right. But they're never going to email you. They're never going to text you. They're never going to call you.
They're old school.
They're very
Send in
old
a letter.
school. Yes. So until you have contacted them, and I'm going to go off on a different tangent here, the only way that they would ever call you or come and knock on your door is if you have a case pending with them that you're already working through. And they are going to send you a letter and say, we will call you on this date at this time. You know, it's not going to be a surprise we're calling.
Yeah, it's going to be an appointment kind of a thing.
Yeah.
That's so good to know.
Yeah. So always be wary of any emails, phone calls, text messages from the IRS. It is not them.
Good to know.
Good. It's looking really good.
Yeah. So we kind of talked about how it's going to evolve. It's going to be with AI and through those types of things and continuing to get more and more dangerous in that way. What is your top piece of advice for listeners right now as we're coming up and preparing for the news? I mean, we're almost to the new year by the time this episode is released.
Yes.
And people are starting to think about filing their taxes. So what's some good advice for next year?
Go ahead and make your IRS account. Go ahead and make that ID.me account. Go ahead and make the IRS account. Go ahead and get your IP PIN for this filing season, because that way you will know no return can go through with your social security number if it does not have that IP PIN on it. It is one more thing to think about, one more thing to take care of, but we all have our phones. You can put a reminder in your phone to, check your IRS account, get your IP PIN, because generally they're not going to mail those. If you sign up for that online, it is going to be an online retrieval. So you will log into your IRS account, retrieve that IP PIN. If it's an identity theft issue where we have filed the identity theft affidavit, yes, that's going to be mailed to you. But they also come in very plain envelopes.
Yeah.
And a lot of them get thrown away.
Yeah. That's me. I threw a debit card out once because it was in such a place.
Yeah.
Unmarked envelope.
Open everything, I guess.
Yeah. So we do need to open everything up and take a look at it. But that is my main platform at this point of trying to get the word out about the IRS accounts, because I do believe in the coming years, the IRS is trying to catch up with technology.
Yeah.
They're trying really hard. And they're going to move to more of an online platform, I believe. So I think that IRS account is going to be very, very important with communication through the IRS.
Good.
I know what I'm doing after this episode.
I know.
Protecting
Me too.
myself from tax identity fraud.
Yeah.
Why is that so hard for me to say?
Tax identity fraud, yes. So another, when you asked about new ways, QR codes. Be very careful about scanning QR codes and where they're going to take you. So that's a new thing. QR codes are great. They can be used for a lot of good, but someone's always going to try and figure out a way to make that a fraudulent thing. So know where you're going, what you're clicking on.
And QR codes are everywhere. I mean, they're on menus. They're on.
Yeah.
So just be careful.
Be careful
of what it's going to lead you to, for sure.
Yeah.
Good advice.
This is really good, Mary Kay. Thank you so much for being on with us today and teaching us about tax identity fraud.
You're very welcome. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to learn more or get in contact with you, where would they find you, or how would they reach out to you? Perhaps they want to use you this season for taxes.
I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love that. So easiest, if you just want to search HR Block Anna, Illinois, my office will pop up. And then our office phone number is 618-833-2222. And I think that's it.
Well, we'll put that in our show notes too, because I know people always like to have a easy link to connect.
I do have a link I can give you.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yes,
we'll do that as well.
I do have a link I can give you for that.
Yeah, that'd be great. So, well, thank you again for being on today. This has been really helpful.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad.
Yeah.
We'll
see you guys next week. So, Jill, where do we go from here?
Be sure to check out our show notes for this episode, and also be sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.